It's going.
Okay.
Okay, just right off the top, your version of Chrome has a bug that causes virtual backgrounds and the touch-up filter to crash when local recording is on.
Yeah, that goes today.
That'll be fun.
Perfect.
Cool. That's a new feature of Chrome. Well, we're going to see how long this lasts before it crashes, in all honesty. I hope you guys can carry it if I drop out.
I'm running on Firefox. So
nice. Oh, okay. And so for some reason it recommends Chrome on our side, but welcome back to Command Control Power, Jason Harrison. It's good to have you back on.
Thank you very much. Very glad to be back.
Yeah, and live viewers can, of course, see the four of us recording here, but other listeners may remember Jason from previous shows. So I'll just give the intro. So Jason Harrison of Harrison Technology Consulting, harrisontechconsulting.com. And also, Jason, you're involved with the NSITSP, and that's at nsitsp.org, if I put the letters in the right order this time. Thank you. So do you want to just kind of give us a quick overview of what that is, and then we'll get into it a little bit later after we go through your background. So what does that stand for, first of all?
So it's the National Society of IT Service Providers. It was founded by Carl Palachuk, who is pretty well known in the Windows PC, MSP space. Prolific author on the MSP business models, and offers all sorts of different things. I can't even keep up with all he's doing. I don't know how he does it, but
yeah.
And also too, Amy Babinchuk, which I've known for years. She's big into the Microsoft stack, but we knew each other from way back when she was doing a lot of stuff on ISA server. I was an old ISA server aficionado as well, and so we kind of crossed paths and stuff on a number of different things at different events over the years. But that's kind of how I got looped in as a founding member of NSITSP, and then later joined pretty much once everything kind of got pulled together, and ended up also being co-chair of the legislative committee,
nice.
Which we've got a couple of different meetings coming up here. I think one next week, it's an open Q&A, and those will make sense in just a little bit once you hear a little bit more about what it is. But well, I mean, we're going on about 2.5 years now. So
amazing. I remember you put it on our radar about 2.5 years ago. And I love this sort of pitch, like the elevator pitch on the website is, it's time to transform our industry into a profession.
Yes.
And so that's a pretty big scope. So yeah, looking forward to that. But you mentioned like Windows work. I know Mr. Apple, ironically, also supports Windows. Do we have the Mr. Apple logo ready to go, Jerry, to display whenever we say that? So Sam, we call Mr. Apple. I don't know why that started, but Sam also does the most Windows of any of us. So you also go way back, Jason, to the Windows world. Remind us how far back you go exactly in technology consulting.
So I actually started long before it was a trend, I guess, a fad, if you want to call it that. 1990. So that was January 1, 90 was our first year. And like I was saying pre-show, we were getting started. It was still MS-DOS for the most part. Windows 3 was just kind of coming around, but was terribly buggy. The Mac really wasn't a play that big in a lot of the business world side of things, and most people were using computers for accounting and spreadsheets and number crunching. So that's where my original focus was helping people deploy and implement business management applications, and just get them going. And of course, oh my gosh, over the last 35 years, it's just been a continual evolution of, we're on version 8 of the company at this point, all the different changes and things. So, and kind of made the shift to up, and it looks like Joe might've just crashed.
Joe just went black.
Yep, and he dropped.
There he goes. We'll give him a minute to update Chrome while we keep talking here.
Yeah, right. So back to most. So while Joe is rebooting or restarting, have you tried restarting, Joe? So just on throughout the years, as the internet became a thing and all the other pieces came about, we went down the whole small business server route back in the late 90s and well into the 2000s. And then I guess I had a client that was running some Mac stuff. They were a publishing house. And so really kind of got my feet wet there on, this was well into, I want to say it was maybe Tiger at the time, maybe before that. It could have been a little bit before, but
one of the animals.
Yeah, one of the cats, right? And so got my feet wet there, and then I guess it was around 2008, 2009. I just looked at the market and what was going on and where things were shifting and things I saw happening within Microsoft. I'd done some stuff with Microsoft pretty deeply. Did a little bit of consulting work with them, with the Office group, and with the SBS group. Went out to spend some time on campus out there a couple of different times, working on different products. There was a product called Office Accounting that I was deeply involved with. It was kind of a QuickBooks competitor that never really caught traction, at least the way Microsoft wanted it to, so it didn't survive. But so it was about 2008, 2009. We were seeing the halo effect of the iPhone and iPad, and just took a look at the market. And it's like, you know what? I'm skating to where the puck's going to be, man, because it looks like Apple's on a tear, and we're going to get into that business. So completely made that big pivot and have not really looked back since. But yes, we still do a lot of Windows stuff too, as well, unfortunately. I mean, I don't, it's kind of tough to be in just one camp, right? Like, I mean, look at all these other devices that we work with. There's, they're Linux based, they're, BSD, whatever it might be. So you have to kind of be well-versed these days to cover the ecosystems that are out there.
Speaking of well-versed, do you feel like you personally are still well-versed in all the technologies, or do you have what we like to call our teams here that do most of the heavy lifting these days? Are you still actively involved on the tech side?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I like staying deeply involved with what's going on. My niche these days is security. Like network, gateway, internet, security, all the way down to the desktop, the whole stack all the way through. And so that's where I spend a lot of my time, I think, more than any. But, I spend a lot of time on the Mac, obviously, and, a little less maybe on the Windows side. I'm afraid my Windows acumen has kind of tailed off a little bit over the years.
Yeah, it's hard to keep up, I think, at times. I mean, in our industry, that's all you have to do is all the time keep up with stuff.
So much, yeah. So much to keep up with.
I'm curious about the security side of things, too. Maybe at some point we can talk some more about that. But that is the way it seems like our field is going in general. It's like you have to be a security expert now in order to manage IT. So it's not just about, yeah, sure, I can support your Mac if you're working with a corporation or a business. It's, yes, I can maintain the security of your environment in all aspects, whether it be the Mac or the network or what have you. It's almost daunting because I feel like, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like it's a much bigger responsibility than just making your Mac work,
For sure. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, man, I long for the days when it was like about credit card security. It was like, be careful where you type in your credit card number. It's like, it's the least of our troubles now,
Yeah. And that's kind of, it dovetails a little bit into what NSITSP is all about as well. I mean, it kind of covers some of that because of where we're going with technology, with the regulatory environment that is starting to emerge. And, we can think, the Kaseya breach, the issues with SolarWinds. Hey, we even had What Screen Connect here just in the last couple of weeks. So, all these various different things are starting to really put network security and our responsibility in the, sort of overseers, if you will, of those different platforms in small business. And a lot of these are, small satellite government agencies. And that's where a lot of this stuff is coming to play, like that breach that happened, where was it, Alabama, a couple of years back. And of course, it was a bunch of small satellite townships and stuff that got nailed with, I believe, some ransomware. And that really, fired it up there in that state. And so that was one of the early sort of tipping points, I think, for it. And that's kind of what led Carl to do NSITSP and get that bootstrapped. And I think we're now close to 1,000 members nationwide. So it's really grown. Like the growth rate has been ridiculous.
Do you have meetings in person these days, or is most of that done virtually still?
Yeah, we're all scattered, across the country. Mm-hmm. So like the legislative committee, I think 3 or 4 of us are in California. I'm here on the East Coast in North Carolina. And then we might have, Colorado, a couple in that sort of central part of the U.S.
And how does this work? Just so our audience can understand a little bit more about it, besides just going to the site. I mean, is it the collective to help educate your group on how to better run their operations, how to better protect their investments? How does this come to pass?
Yeah, so NSITSP, the whole idea behind it was that we weren't being well represented in the industry as a whole. Both Carl and Amy were part of CompTIA. They've been on the CompTIA board. Matter of fact, I believe they're both still active, if I'm not mistaken. And they just felt like CompTIA had shifted to more of a vendor-driven, angled organization, and was looking kind of more out for vendor-specific topics and things like that, more so than they were the individual IT service providers out there. And we also wanted something that was covering all the bases, whether it be consultants, whether it be just still break fix IT service providers. There's a lot of those guys out there still, as well as MSPs, MSSPs, and so on. And so that was really it. So we've chartered the whole organization to be set up where we can't, like, vendors can come in, they can contribute, they can, obviously put up some money to help out, support the organization. And we're always looking for those partners as well, because they're very helpful. But the idea is to be completely member driven. And so vendors, the way that the structure was made is that we can't have a vendor takeover, maybe 5 years out when it really hits major numbers. It's always going to be by us, for us. And the idea behind it was that the regulatory framework is coming, like it or not. It's going to happen. It's, we don't know how quick it's going to happen. It's probably going to happen in stages. We're going to see states like California and New York and the usual leaders in these areas that typically, pioneer new legislative models will likely be the definers of a lot of this stuff. And then a lot of the other states are likely just to follow suit, and basically adopt maybe some variant or version of these things. Because think about it, guys. When we started looking at the various different industries out there, if you're an attorney, you obviously have to pass the bar. You have to go through all these different requirements to be in that line of work and to do practice law in your given state or jurisdiction in which you decide to do so. CPAs, even hairdressers and lawn maintenance folks have to go through certain stuff depending on the states they're in and where they're at. Technology companies really kind of don't. We can just hang a shingle out and say, hey, we can help you with your computer systems, and so, and obviously there's a lot of us out there that are doing all that we can to do it the right way, but there's a whole lot of people out there that just aren't, right? And a lot of times those end up being the ones that end up causing the bad stories out there, that we hear about the big problems because they didn't do this or they didn't do that, or they didn't really impress upon their client, hey, you really need to fix this problem or it's going to be a big problem, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we think it's going to be headed. And so we wanted to be ready. We wanted to be fully membered up in all 50 states, already have maybe some relationships started with different legislative, and Joe crashed again.
That's funny.
Anyway, so we want to be all set up and ready to go. And I think we have members in all 50 states, but the idea is that we want to educate and provide the mechanisms for each member to reach out to their local legislator, establish that relationship, so that as legislation is being crafted, once it starts to happen in your jurisdiction, your state, whatever, oh yeah, I know, Jason over here, they've already got a leg up on this. We've already developed, with the help of an attorney, a legislative framework that we basically kind of borrowed some ideas off of different existing laws that have already been passed in all various different states, so that we can, have something ready. Like, here's a good example. Here's a good basic framework for what something like this could look like. and it's basically you'd register with your state. Yeah, you might have to pay a couple $100. You know how these things work. I mean, it's not too different than doing your LLC or your corporation or whatever. And then over time, we don't see that the education requirements are going to hit right out of the gate. It's going to be more of just, hey, we just want to know who you are and you're out there. And yeah, it may be that, hey, you got to be at least a certified Apple consultant or a certified Microsoft professional or whatever it might be. I mean, there might be some basic minimums, but that's going to vary from state to state because this is not going to be federally regulated. We know that. This is going to be, if you look at all the other professions out there, they're all done and regulated by their local state jurisdiction. So
you can
but that's the idea behind it.
To practice like in a specific state, is that the idea? Because I wonder how that works. Of course, I'm thinking about remote work, and that probably applies to a lot more people now than it did when I was,
sure,
in all different states, doing work for people in several different states. So now I'm in Colorado doing work largely for people in Connecticut, New York, Florida. I mean, there's different, there's different states where our clients typically are. So how do you see that intersection with like a regulation in a specific state, regulating the industry in that state, and practicing across state lines, essentially?
Yeah, probably much in the same way. You'll see some, you might have heard the term reciprocity, where you've got like in payroll, if you've got say a company that's right on the state line, and maybe several of their folks work in one state but live in the other, or
right.
Maybe they're a contract. We actually have one of these. We've got a client who's a general contractor. They do commercial construction, and they basically do North Carolina, Virginia, and South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And so, unfortunately, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia don't have reciprocity across the payroll stuff. So they're having to track payroll independently for each state. Yeah. But when you've got reciprocity in place, so we've already thought of that and kind of baked that into sort of the plan, if you will, to be part of that early conversation. Simply because that is a reality, as you pointed out, Joe, and you're a perfect example of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of professions probably, I'm also thinking of therapy. Like you mentioned some examples
sure.
of, things that are regulated, like you need to be, I mean, you could be a, quote unquote therapist, or like, maybe anything from a life coach to a, there's different like forms of that. But if you want to be a like, licensed, like practicing, therapist in a certain way. I think that's also state by state. And I imagine a lot of therapy these days is virtual. So it may be a similar kind of arrangement where, you could be qualified or certified or, verified in some way in your own state. And then, it's like, how do you know where I don't know where my clients are sometimes, so yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of where the reciprocity comes in. I mean, it's like once you've gained in your home base, where like if Colorado's home base now, it's like, hey, okay, you do your coverage there in Colorado, you tick off all the boxes for them, and then that just works for wherever you may be.
Right.
And each state will just cross accept that sort of thing. Oh yeah, because a lot of our members, even within the NSITSP, are much in the same way. They're covering a very large swath of the country in some cases. So
got it. My other question on this whole general topic is like, how do you see the concept of like regulation on a state by state level, certification, whether that's by vendor or through NSITSP, or states or whatever, or, and or like education fitting into that, like you mentioned earlier. And then, the concept of like licensing versus certification. I mean, these are all different kind of like things that I see like a Venn diagram, they intersect in some ways, and in other ways they may be independent. How do you see all of these things kind of fitting together in an ideal way?
So, yeah, we've really talked about that a lot. So NSITSP, we're not going to be in the certification and training, but that's not the idea. And it looks like Joe left us again.
Joe asks a question and then he takes off.
I'm telling you, man. So anyway, so we don't really see NSITSP, like I said, is really being the certification company. We're just simply trying to be that legislative sort of shim, if you will, between our members and industry and the legislative branches in each area, and then being able to provide the resources to do what you need to do to make the connections and to foster the relationships and to be that voice and to be that expert that your legislator can turn to for questions, so that we get good legislation crafted from the jump. Like, there's going to be a lot of competing interest here. Insurers, for example, they've got some, and they've got a big voice and a big lobbying group. And we're looking to see if we can, because it's kind of like with the insurers, we both have very similar goals, honestly. And there's potentially a very symbiotic relationship there. So, you've got that sort of thing. But I think on the certification front, obviously it's already there. Like, there's all sorts of things you can go get. And I think it'll just be up to each state to check off, hey, this is good, CompTIA, whatever, this is great, get a CompTIA trust mark for your MSP, get maybe, some states may only say, hey, you only just need to be an Apple Consultants Network member if you do Apple stuff, or, whatever it might be. I think we're good. I think for the most part, the certification stuff will be pretty low level in the long run. But determining exactly what that's going to be, that's still kind of a little ways out. And I don't think there's going to be any one standard necessarily, because like I said, it's already out there. It's just a matter of making sure everybody does it. And, that they're trained up to do the work that they need to do. Right.
Yeah. I think, so much of our audience is small business, that having something like this for them can be so critical, as not only just preparing for the inevitable of legislation changes, but also just having a group to rely on for this sort of thing, where you're not just Google searching, what do I need to do for this new law or anything like that. So this becomes a real big collective that's super critical for such small businesses that listen to our show. Many of them are either an army of one or just a couple of people. So
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the idea behind the NSITSP, is to be that single funnel to be able to grab that information, to watch what's going on, to see, we're paying attention to what bills are being looked at and considered in each area. And then, when anything important really comes up, we're jumping on it and getting some action on it for that particular state and the members of that state.
How does that work, Jason? Like, so are you interested in sort of driving the narrative in that way? Is that one of the goals of the organization?
So glad you asked that question. I have found that there's a lot of people out there, because I was at went to an Enable event here nearby. The Enable folks have a headquarters right down the road from us, about an hour west. And I was talking about NSITSP a little bit there, and hey, yeah, aren't those guys pushing for legislation? Like, no, we're not pushing for it. We're just trying to be ready for it, and we want a seat at the table so that we can help guide and help craft it across the U.S. So that we get smart legislation, because as we know, legislators don't really know what this business is all about. They're not very good at crafting common sense legislation right out of the gate, usually, right? So, to say the least. So, that's really the goal, is to just try to get established, talk to legislators, let them know we're here, let them know what we're trying to do. Because one of the things, for example, one of our guys in the legislative committee brought up the fact that he had talked to one of his guys, and as legislators are, they're mostly attorneys and lawyers and different, so they were saying, oh, well, they need to have a 4-year computer science degree. And, seriously, that was stuff that they were actually looking at. So it's already getting traction in states like California. And so we're really watching those carefully to see what's happening there. And our guys are making contact with those guys and hopefully letting them understand, because think about it. I mean, how many 4-year degree folks do we have in our industry? You might have some, but do they have a 4-year degree in IT? Right?
4-year degree, you just need to know where all the settings are in system settings. That's really the mission critical. that's the test right there. I mean, you could see, I mean, in all seriousness, through Apple's own struggles with like, how do you certify someone? How do you test for like very relevant, important information like that? There, I mean, some are hits, some are misses. They got a lot of flack from having a test that's like, I mean, I remember in school, it was like you could tell when they were teaching to the test. It's like memorize these facts. Why are these useful? It's irrelevant. The point is you need to be able to like just recite these facts later. That doesn't help anybody, but Apple struggled with some of that, and they had successes in other areas. But that's just one very narrow kind of aspect, is like this, certification test. And it can be really tough to figure out like what are the qualifications that you need. So for example, beyond like education and testing and certifying, are there things like codes of ethics? Like what other kind of factors are involved in an ideal, regulatory environment or, licensing kind of setup like that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we do have a published code of ethics. It is published up there on the site. And it's pretty common sense stuff. I mean, if you read over that, it's what hopefully most, upstanding, legitimate IT service providers are doing. But as you know, we do have some out there that aren't and don't necessarily follow these different guidelines. So part of the NSITSP is also that aspect of it. Like, hey, you can market this to your clients and say, I'm member of NSITSP, and we subscribe to these code of ethics and that sort of thing as well. So that's kind of part of it. I mean, it really ended up being just kind of a side, thought that came about, but it really does cut to the core of what we're trying to do, is to turn this into a real profession, much in the same way, not that it hasn't been necessarily, but, just officially in the eyes of the legal frameworks and the government regulatory frameworks and things like that. Because we're getting to the point where the security discussion is driving this. And this goes back to, Sam, your earlier mention on security. This dovetails directly into that, because a lot of this stuff is coming out of the problems with systems not being configured correctly or not being secured properly, or, just fundamental basic best practices just not being followed and leading to major, major problems.
Speaking of which, just along those lines, I was actually just looking at the code of ethics page that you have posted there. Have you ever had a situation, just to throw a little curveball into the mix, where someone that's joined your organization has, let's say, not abided by those codes of ethics, or you've had to remove them from your org because they're not complying with what you
so far not that we're aware of.
Nothing's been reported.
Yeah, nothing's been reported. I mean, it's kind of, this is early days for NSITSP ultimately. I mean, it is a marathon. It's not a sprint. We knew, anytime you're engaging with government and regulatory stuff, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time for all that to really gain traction, because like I said, it's starting to in some of the bigger states, California, New York, and a couple of others. But, in our state, for example, nothing's really happening yet, but it's just a matter of time. I mean, it's going to happen, especially as we see just in general across the globe, data privacy and security and all these conversations that are kind of intertwined in some degree, come together. And it's going to lead to some form of regulatory frameworks and environments that we're all going to have to go through to continue to do business the way that we've done it.
Are you hoping they might go easy on you, Sam, if you joined and you had a little problem with the
I'm just making. How do you know?
Right, yeah.
Just feeling testing the water. I understand.
How strict are these codes of ethics?
It's at this point, obviously, it's like honor system at this stage. But I mean, as the organization grows and it becomes, it gets more traction, I think over time, I think there probably will be some way to, at least have some sort of side reporting or double checking of that. I mean, at the end of the day, if customers know that you're an NSITSP member and they don't think you followed that code of ethics, we'll probably get reports from end customers saying, hey, this member did not do, didn't follow the rule book like he's supposed to. So.
Yeah, I mean, you need to start somewhere. Like you said, maybe it's common sense, stuff, but and maybe the four of us agree on like, well, that all makes sense. We're all doing that already, but it's you can't assume that everybody follows the same playbook, and so you kind of need to start somewhere with a code of ethics, and then say you can. I mean, you can just hold people accountable. You can point to it. You can, otherwise you're like writing the rules after the fact, and so
right.
yeah, I think it's important to have that and develop it as time goes on. And maybe not everybody agrees. I mean, maybe you get really fine grained with some of that stuff, and then there's some disagreement about it. But at least you can kind of develop it, and it can evolve over time. And then if somebody doesn't follow it, they can be. They can have their membership revoked or their license revoked if it comes to regulation like that. It's interesting because, like you said, you want to see this become a profession, and of course, that might sound like a little, dismissive or something to a lot of the people who, we count ourselves as very professional in this industry.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
But if all we're doing is just self-selecting and identifying, like, I'm a technology. It used to be like, I'm a nerd, I'm a computer guy, whatever the sayings were, compared to like the standard for a doctor. I mean, maybe Jerry doesn't always agree with this, but doctor, lawyer, those kinds of like quote unquote professions, compared to like computer nerd at one end of the spectrum to like technology professional at the other. I think there's a lot more variation in our industry. And so, yeah, I mean, there's clearly a need to maybe like bring up the bottom end of that, or you set the bar a little bit higher, for us.
Yeah. I mean, and talking about the different professions. So when we set out to create the basic, regulatory framework idea, we were looking at CPAs, but the one that we ended up kind of looking at that, because it wasn't too overly done, it was fairly basic, but kind of had a lot of similarities, was a locksmith. Because locksmiths have to have certification. They have to maintain certain codes of ethics to do their jobs. If they don't, their licenses are revoked and stripped. Right. Like, if the guy ends up breaking into a whole bunch of places because he's an expert lock picker, right? Yeah. So see, that's kind of the idea. So it's a similar thing. So we actually did use that as sort of a guidepost, because it was one that was available, I believe, in all the states. And they were all pretty similarly language-wise, as far as requirements and whatnot, very, very similar. So.
It makes a lot of sense, actually, think about a locksmith, because you can imagine if there's, locksmith lets a person into their home, they get locked out, the locksmith helps out, and then, sends the bill, doesn't get paid. A disreputable locksmith might say, well, I can go get the money myself. I can just let myself in, In our industry, I've heard colleagues actually say, I'm going to log into their email and do something, like that kind of thing. No. So yeah, exactly. And it's very like
talking about Sam again there.
Yeah, I didn't want to mention a friend. No, but yeah, it's like you could see how people might not realize like that's really like that's not cool. That's not following our code of ethics. Like,
right.
There's maybe for some people you need to spell that out and say you can't. I don't care if the client owes you money. I don't care if the client, whatever, like you just don't log in. Or like, here's an innocuous case. The client has my cell phone. I don't want them to have my cell phone. I can log into their contacts and remove my number, like I've heard people say that, and it's like, I agree. I don't want them to have my cell phone, but I'm not the one that's going to go in and like change their contacts, even if it's my contact. Yeah. So.
Jerry, was that you?
Yeah.
I think that's on episode 459. Jerry said that.
You change the number to Jerry's mobile. If they're getting really annoying, you can just switch the number. But yeah, it's I guess you need to spell it out sometimes. And so that's an interesting analogy to the locksmith.
I never thought about that as a comparable profession, but once you said it. Boom. Makes
we didn't either until we started actually looking at all the stuff. And because CPAs were similar, but there was enough dissimilar things within that environment and how they're regulated. And they're pretty regulated,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And obviously law and attorney, there's a whole lot going on there that's not the same thing. But yeah, it ended up being that the locksmith was like the closest match. And we were like, when we saw it, same thing. We're like, oh, wow, that just totally makes sense. Yeah, right.
I'm sure a lot of people have seen it, but speaking of locksmith, so Lockpicking Lawyer is a great like YouTube channel. I don't know if anybody's seen that.
Oh,
but,
really?
like,
There's a thing?
Yeah, if these things come up sometimes on the algorithm, and so there's this guy called the Lockpicking Lawyer, and
man.
basically I think probably I first saw him because he was like showing you all the vulnerabilities of various locks and things, some of them being smart locks and whatever else. But it's amazing how many locks are really poorly designed and insecure. And so there's another analogy to our line of work where a lot of software has vulnerabilities and
routers,
configurations. Default passwords, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
yeah totally.
Yeah. And it looks like there's going to be some stuff happening there where it's going to be more of a secure by default, which will win, but it'll mean maybe the equipment might cost a little bit more because of all the security development work they'll have to do up front. But that's all the stuff that's coming, right? Like, and it's been interesting to follow some of the different events to see where the thinking is on where the responsibility will be. Like we have now a table with CISA. And so we have a member, he's part of our group, who lives in that area, and he had already had some interactions with CISA, but we're part of the CISA Small Business Advisor Board as well. It's been very interesting to see some of the stuff coming out of there, like who's going to be responsible. And we're starting to see at least the discussion of it at the federal level for when you're engaging with the federal government, businesses and entities and things like that. But guaranteed, that's going to trickle down to the states too, right? So
exactly, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. And thanks again for bringing this all to our attention. I'm curious, Jason, as we maybe switch gears to another topic, how can listeners and our patrons and colleagues out there, especially in the Apple Consultants Network, get involved? I mean, obviously we have the URL. They can visit the URL here. I'll put it on screen, nsitsp.org. Do you encourage them to become, members, supporters?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
fly on the wall. Yep.
Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of different membership levels that you can jump into. Just a single professional membership, I believe, is either $125 or $150 a year. And then there's, different company levels. And usually when you jump in at a company level, all your team is automatically pulled into that under that one umbrella bit. And then we're encouraging too, vendors, anybody who supports small business consultants and IT professionals out there to come in and help support our organization. And just because it's a win-win, everybody's going to win in this if we play our cards correctly. And, we're excited about, what we're going to be able to do with this. It's going to be a marathon. Like I said, it's going to take time. Each state's going to be different. You're going to have some states enact stuff years ahead of others. Right. But the cool thing about that is that we're going to be, those states and our members in those states are going to be able to learn real quickly and prepare, because they'll be able to see what's kind of coming and make that information available to their legislators. Because really the key thing here is just learning how to connect with your legislator, have that conversation, just networking, man, with I mean, it's really that comes down to that. It's just, hey, here's who we are. Here's what we're trying to do. We're here to be a resource for you, to help you out when this kind of thing starts hitting the fan, right? And when it becomes a hot topic. And we want to help you make sure that you shine big inside of your constituents, when you're passing very sensible, very common sense stuff where everybody wins.
Yeah, that's really important. I'm glad you guys are getting ahead of it. And, like you said, it's a marathon. It's already been 2.5 years. And so, maybe we're just beginning to get into that in the next phase. So
it's still early days.
Yeah. Nice.
But so definitely go join. I mean, we're trying, the more members we have, obviously, the more different legislations around the country are going to pay attention, right? And it really all comes down to a numbers game. So the more members, the stronger member base we have, the better where I think we're going to be, and the more effective I think we'll be in the long run.
Nice. Well, good luck, and do keep us posted on how that's going. And awesome. Well, so I think there were a couple of other topics that I wanted to sort of bring up here in case this is interesting to anybody to discuss. So, I mean, we had this great feedback from you about a previous episode we did. You listened to, or I guess you watched one of our videos there, and you gave us some feedback about like public cloud versus private cloud. And so, I think you had an interesting perspective that we kind of maybe glossed over, overlooked a little bit. So, we were talking about, like, again, the concept of, in the old days, we would have a server in the basement, as some of my clients say. And, these days, for a lot of those same clients, the appropriate solution is, say, Dropbox, something cloud-based, or, run by a vendor.
Right.
It used to be an email server in the office, in the network closet, in the, versus now hosted by Microsoft 365. And I was all in favor of, vendor provided solutions like that, cloud hosted things like that. But you brought some interesting points to it. Do you want to kind of encapsulate what your primary feedback was around that?
Yeah. So this is all honestly coming from data privacy, security. At the end of the day, do you have control over your information? What kind of control do you have over your security? At the end of the day, are you going to entrust that to a vendor's big system? I mean, my whole thing with cloud computing is it makes sense when you've got a distributed company. Maybe you're spread around in a lot of different places, and so you need distributed apps and distributed file shares and things like that. But a lot of small companies, at least a lot of the ones that we encounter, are single shops that do the thing in their niche and their part of the world, and that's kind of it, right? Like you don't necessarily need to have to go out and do all this SaaS subscription stuff and hosted subscription stuff, which actually adds up quite significantly depending on the scale and size of your organization. There are less expensive ways of doing it. And a lot of it does go back to that kind of older school way of thinking, where, you might have your own platform, wherever it may be, because the whole thing is with big, large environments, when you add the number of people that are involved in these massive back-end deployments, engineers, support professionals, all this other stuff. My whole motto has always been, the more people and the more complex the technology, the more trouble you're going to have.
Sure.
And that pretty much seems to reign true in almost every situation that we see with a breach. I mean, even Microsoft themselves, you mentioned them, just had some of their corporate email accounts get hacked into pretty solidly through their own infrastructure. I know I've read a number of stories out there where, there's been lateral movement within M365 where one account got compromised, and lo and behold, these state actors or attackers were able to move laterally into other accounts through that one vulnerability, that one hole. So when you look at all that sort of thing, okay, how big of a target do you want to be, right? Because it's about attack surface, ultimately. When you're putting things out on the internet, your attack surface has just grown exponentially, cloud services or whatever. And if you're not securing that stuff with really good, like, I don't know, YubiKeys, right? Something, hardware tokens. If you're not securing that stuff with that sort of thing, you're really it's like Russian roulette. It's maybe just a matter of when rather than if. With a lot of these things. So my kind of perspective on it always stemmed from a security point of view right out of the gate. Yeah. And then data privacy comes into it as well, because we don't have the regulatory framework around data management and governance, and who really owns that data and what are they allowed to do with that data. I mean, when I hate to use Facebook as the the big bad example, but
we'll allow it.
Who they are.
We'll allow it.
Yeah. So, and I mean, when you look at the lack of the regulatory framework around all of that stuff, we're seeing Europe make some pretty good gains with GDPR and the various different things that are happening there. But even within that, there's still some wiggle room in some different areas when you start really parsing down all the details of that.
Yeah,
and
Facebook is a great example of a concern about privacy because, of course, like they were, I think, collecting phone numbers for multi-factor, or two-factor once upon a time, years and years ago. And then some number of years ago, it came to light that they were using that information that no one ever like allowed them to offered them to use for this purpose. They were using that to establish more of a social graph among, their members. So it's like, I gave you my phone number, not for my account profile or anything like that, just for two-factor. And I never said you could use it and, match it against anyone else, but like they were matching it against, oh, this person uploaded their contacts and your phone number's in their contacts. So do you want to be their friend? And it's like, what? And so I've had clients say, oh, I don't know. They're always asking for my phone number in the case of Microsoft or some other vendor. And I've had to say, well, I trust Microsoft or I trust Apple with this information, but you're right to be skeptical because of the Facebook example. It's like way too tempting for these companies to, just hold our information and keep it like, just have it, but not use it. It's way too tempting. Like they're going to use it for that purpose. They're going to use it to program their AI models and things like that. And I'm sure that's, it's right to be skeptical, of course, with that stuff. So, yeah.
Hey, look, when people like Jeffrey Hinton, who's considered to be the godfather of AI, worked for Google and he left so he could speak freely, does that not kind of give you a big factor, right? Like that's really makes you think. So exactly. So it's a part of all that stuff, really. And I get it. It's a little bit of an old. I mean, to me, cloud computing, it's not the be all to end all to replace everything that ever existed before. It's just another tool in the toolbox where, if applicable, use it. Fine, but be sure you secure the heck out of it. Yeah, and be sure you're comfortable. Be very sure you're comfortable with the lack of regulation around data governance and all that sort of thing. And you're really clearly reading the fine print in those legal agreements, which we all love to spend hours reading over. So, it's you got to watch that stuff.
Yeah, I think so what I keep going back to is yes, in theory, you could secure your private cloud more. I mean, this is why I was kind of like late to the game, and embracing a lot of these cloud services among our colleagues, because I always felt like, well, once it's up in the cloud, as Sam's client's point, it's up there in the cloud. It's a free for all. It's like you said, the attack surface is much larger because you could basically attack that data from anywhere. Whereas if it's in my location on my server, and
you
I know that
can tighten the screws way tighter. Exactly. Yes.
Except it's then only my responsibility to do that. Whereas like if it is in, a public cloud of some sort, there's certain maybe security defaults. There's, it's somebody else's responsibility to secure like that part of the infrastructure. And that's not to say that I have no responsibility in that, because, there's different things you can do, to your point about, maybe just making really sure it's secure. There's more things you can do, but yeah, it's a question though. I don't know.
So if you've not seen, there was an article I read about Microsoft's M365 security defaults being just absolutely atrocious. Like you've really got to go screw that thing down. And I'll see if I can dig it up and send it to you guys. You might want to put it in the show notes, but it was enlightening to me. I mean, that right there was enough to make me go, okay, yeah, I don't know about all that. So, So I remember, Joe, you used to talk about Carrier Connect. We still run it. We love that platform. Wow. I've always been a big fan of Carrier Technologies. We were part of their group. We were connected with them even before we were into the more broader technology space of working with all sorts of platforms. We started using their stuff back when we were basically just doing Windows and PCs at one point, and before GFI Software had acquired them. And pretty big fans of a lot of their technology. They do a pretty good job. It's very small business focused for the most part, or at least small to medium, and have actually just recently had to go through a pretty painful, we need to take a look at what we're doing on security gateways. We were a Sophos partner for over a decade. Really loved their UTM platform, UTM Non, which was the old Astero gold standard. It used to be out, which Sophos acquired Astero many years ago, but it was literally the gold standard bar kind of on a UTM device, like how all others were judged, and they were way ahead. I mean, man, it's been crazy because we started looking at all these NGFS firewalls and all this other stuff, and I'm like, but it doesn't do this and it doesn't do that, and where's this It's like, it's incredible how well thought out and the details of that platform was. But, you know, like a lot of these companies, they got picked up by venture capitalists, and they've been doing some reorg stuff, and they cut out, like, used to be able to license these security gateways in multi-year deals that were, you know, pretty decent discounts. And just an example, say a 30 or 40 user company on like a mid level of their security gateway ran, I don't know, $5,000 or $6,000 a year. And we went to go renew one last year, and it was like $15,000. And the people just looked at me and like, you're gonna have to find something else. We're not going to make that jump. Wow. So so I had to jump in and start looking at security gateway technologies and UTM platform devices and next generation firewalls. And man, for about the last 10 to 12 months, I think that's all I've been really doing. So it seems. And interestingly enough, I landed back to Carrier Connect plus Carrier Control, just because those two together are a rather powerful combination. And they were priced so much better, like, you know, half, maybe 2/3 of what everybody else was doing, maybe a little more than some small business focused technologies that are out there, but, you know, was reasonably priced and just had a good set of stuff. And we're syslogging log files out directly into a Splunk enterprise instance at each place, and, you know, building up our own dashboards and alerts and all this other stuff. And it's pretty sweet. Wow. It's a slick setup.
That sounds very sweet. Yeah, I'm beginning to think you're sort of if Sam is Mr. Apple, Jason, you're like Mr. On-premises. You're like the on-premises guy, you know, for security, for servers, for, you know, collaboration tools, things like that. It's
you know, the funny thing is too, is like servers, right? Like, okay, that definition has drastically changed in the last, you know, 10, 20 years, right? Or more. But I mean, because today, you know, a great server is a well accompanied little Mac Mini, right? Running Connect server on it. And, you know, I mean, really, I mean, it's not the same thing. So when you start doing the math on like supporting it, because it's so easy to support, there really isn't a lot of support cost to it. And then you look at the licensing, and you even look at the cost of the hardware, and then you go look at what you're paying in subscription. And again, depends on the number of users you have in a cloud scenario and all that. But I mean, one of these little Mac Mini servers can handle, you know, a couple hundred easy people. Yeah. And, you know, when you start doing the math on M365, so we did that for one client. It was, again, about a 30 to 40 user company. And I think the number was 40. And M365 for them was going to run about $6,000 a year on the $1,250 a user plan, right? Mm-hmm. And and a Mac Mini with Carrier Connect was going to run them year one with the hardware, $2,500. Year two with the license renewals, under $1,000.
Wow. Yeah, you make a good point there.
So when you start doing the math, it really, really starts to go, especially over time, over the number of years.
The more I think about this, the more I'm like, okay, how am I going to switch all these cloud people? I'm like, this is giving me heart palpitations.
Sorry, Sam.
Problem. Every time we have a guest, you know, promoting some new idea, Sam just wants to shift his whole business.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you gotta do it where it makes sense, right? Like, I mean, that's the thing. And I think I just always stepped into it with that eye towards, because I was so security focused from the jump and always looking at everything from a security perspective, that was where I've always just really been challenged with any cloud stuff, period. And you can't, I mean, yes, there's some successes, obviously, in different ways of implementing different things and how that all works. But again, we're still such early days. There's still no good regulatory frameworks around data governance, data management, data privacy, all this data that we're putting on other people's servers, right? Yeah. You know, you really got to stop and think about that. I mean, we use tools that are SaaS tools, right? I mean, because there's certain things that just make sense, like RMM, right? Like that. Generally, for a small company, you're not going to run your own, you know, Kaseya server internally, and let's try to avoid them, I guess, altogether. But I don't know. They're probably the most secure option out there now that they've had their event. That's usually seems to be the case, right?
Right. Yeah.
But Adigy, Enable, whatever tool that you like to run, right? Like those tools, it just makes more sense for a smaller size MSP service provider to run that in a SaaS environment. And so we do that because that makes sense, right? But we also put hardware tokens on everything. So.
Nice. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. There's ways of securing the cloud, like to your point about, how do you really lock it down? You can't just a lot of these things are not turnkey, to your point about Microsoft 365, for example, like with the defaults not being appropriate maybe for most people. I think there's a lot more to dig into here. I think, I'm sort of envisioning like a spreadsheet or some kind of, comparison or like a site that can say, all right, first of all, like, what do you need? Is it file sharing, collaboration,
decision tree
kind of services? Yeah. Decision tree.
Speed,
like that, exactly.
speed and performance. What's your tolerance for risk, for exposure? Yeah. I mean, we go through that conversation all the time.
Right. Do you have two offices where everybody works, or do you have, totally distributed workforce? How many people, like that was another point you made about, like comparing the price, I'm not going to like maintain an Exchange server for 4 people, there's a minimum number where like that would be competitive with Microsoft 365 cost wise and, and then to get the other maybe security benefits and things. So it seems like it's not as simple as like I'm all in on the cloud. I think it really depends on the client, and the typical types of clients that we have are typically under that 30 to 40 level. So for us, it's only those exceptional cases where we might consider that. And so there's I think a decision tree is a great way to look at it, Jerry. Maybe you can get to work on one of those for us.
Get out working on it tonight, Joe.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, he's got to put some logs on the fire. He's cold over there with his fleece coat, Jerry.
Well, but you can achieve a lot of the same functionality with a lot of these platforms anyway, right? Like that's the other thing too. I mean, if you really start looking at what you're trying to do, you can do some pretty interesting things still. And so, it's kind of funny. Sometimes it's like, the old way, it might have its drawbacks, and it does. I'm not going to argue that it's better. I mean, you do have some different things, but each one of these different business models and setups are going to have their own, pluses and minuses. But I think you can secure your own environment way better. That's just period. End of story. Because obviously you can't do that with a big cloud infrastructure. It's got to be open to everybody and all the scenarios and all the different things, right? And so that is one benefit, that if you do want to go with, true public cloud, which is something private but hosted by some other third party, that you do kind of get that benefit to that model. But that model typically costs even more than the public cloud options. So, then you're back to the financial discussion again, as to over time, say over 5-10 years, what is this really going to cost you? And again, if you've got your own environment, you're less of a target. I mean, you're not, obviously something like M365 is being banged on all the time. Sure, they've got their security folks up there watching and doing what they can, but as we've seen, doesn't always take care of things.
Not a guarantee.
So. No, it isn't.
Yeah, it's a good point. I know, and the question of like, cost. I always, I try and avoid situations where it's like, well, if you want the best security, you've got to pay more. It's like, it feels like we all should just have some base level of security that's really good for most people, or enough for most people, without having to make it this cost, conversation with the client. Like, what's your data worth to you? What's your security worth to you? Like, do you want good security, or do you really want good security? And because it's just, it shouldn't be, to some degree, there's always going to be costs involved, but it shouldn't be this like, cost. I don't know. I feel like security is a basic human right almost, it's something
exactly
like that.
Right.
So the base level should be as high as possible. Yeah.
And that's why we've always taken the approach that if it's possible, we're going to go with what makes the most sense, but at the same time, what's going to make the most sense from a security perspective as well.
Right. Exactly. Well, more to dig into, perhaps in a return episode, hopefully without as long of a wait to have you back on, Jason, when you're maybe as NSI Oh man, I'm gonna miss.
Oh, we almost got through.
Well, Joe.
I should have just said it. I think I had it, but NSITSP as things develop, we'd love to hear more about that. And certainly,
hey guys, go join. Yeah, go join. And anybody listening to the podcast, go join. Help support yourself at the end of the day. I mean, this is a collective group effort that's, I think, going to really be good for our industry. And it's going to help ensure that all of us in all the states around the U.S. are going to have reasonably sensible regulatory stuff thrown at us, not crazy stuff that you just can't hit and can't meet. And that's really the goal. We're not pushing for legislation. We're just being ready for it for when it comes. And we're trying to be that voice of the ITSP, all of our different members and all of our different business models out there to make sure that, common sense legislation gets passed.
Yeah. And like you said earlier, that we all have a seat at the table. Thanks for for holding our place there. We really appreciate that. And
come join us.
That somebody's working on it. Yeah, absolutely. NSITSP.org for the listeners out there. And thanks, Jason Harrison, for joining us on Command Control Power, Harrison Technology Consulting, harrisontechconsulting.com. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. All right.